It was Sunday, the 22nd of August 1976. The summer sun was setting over Britta's Bay, a quiet beach spot in County Wicklow, Ireland. Families were packing up their picnic baskets, tents flapping in the breeze, and tourists strolling barefoot in the sand. For 19-year-old Elizabeth Plunkett, it was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway with friends, a break from Dublin, a bit of calm before college resumed. But that evening, Elizabeth said she needed to use the toilet. Just a short walk, she told them. She wandered off toward the dunes. She never came back. Her friends waited, then searched, then panicked. The Gardaí were alerted that night. A full-scale search followed, combing the beach, the forest trails, every road leading in and out of the area. But it took weeks before anyone found her. In the early days of September, searchers discovered her body dumped in woodland near Glencree. She had been sexually assaulted, violently beaten, and strangled. The scene was horrifying, but more than that, it was controlled. Whoever had done this had taken their time. There were no immediate suspects, no witnesses, and for a while it seemed like this was just a random, isolated tragedy. But the Gardaí weren't convinced, because this was not the first time a young Irish woman had vanished, and it wouldn't be the last. 2 weeks earlier, almost to the day, another young woman had disappeared. Her name was Mary Duffy. She was 24 years old, a quiet, hard-working woman from Castlebar in County Mayo. That night, Mary had gone out with friends in Ballina. It was just a typical evening. Some music, some drinks, some laughter. She stayed later than planned, and around midnight, she decided to hitchhike home. Back then, it wasn't considered dangerous. In rural Ireland, people trusted strangers. Hitchhiking was how students, nurses, and young workers got around. But Mary never made it home. Her body was found days later in a bog near Letterkenny. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and left face down in the mud. It didn't make the national headlines, not right away. Locals were devastated, of course, but in 1976, crimes like this were often treated as regional tragedies, not the beginning of something darker. But detectives noticed something disturbing. 2 young women, 2 violent deaths, both abducted while alone, both dumped in remote areas. And there was no sign of robbery, no drugs, nothing random. Whoever had done this wasn't out of control. They were hunting, and now they were on the move. The investigation into Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett's murders was going nowhere until a name quietly popped up in a different case. John Shaw. Born in 1946 in Lancashire, England, Shaw had a long criminal record. Theft, assault, and most disturbingly, multiple charges of sexual violence. In the United Kingdom, he'd already spent time in prison. His accomplice, Geoffrey Evans, a few years younger, a former roofer, clean-cut, well-spoken, but behind that, a predator with a violent history. The two had met in prison, became close, and when they were released, they made a quiet move across the Irish Sea, settling into small towns in Ireland. Why Ireland? Because, as they later told police, it was a place where we wouldn't be watched. They weren't here to start over. They were here with a plan. What kind of plan? Not just theft, not just sex crimes, not even one murder. According to multiple witness statements and later psychiatric reports, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans had a shared goal: to abduct, rape, and kill 1 woman every week. That wasn't exaggeration. That's what they told authorities. 1 woman per week, until they were stopped. And in the summer of 1976, they were just getting started. By the time summer hit in 1976, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans were fully operational. They rented cottages in quiet towns, changed cars often, and moved from county to county with no pattern. To neighbors, they were just two British lads keeping to themselves. Nobody suspected a thing. But behind closed doors, they were planning something horrifying. They used a blue car, usually freshly cleaned, no trace of evidence. Shaw would drive. Evans would sit in the back with a rope, chloroform, and a pre-packed kit that included plastic sheeting, a shovel, and duct tape. Their targets: young women walking alone, women hitchhiking. Anyone who looked like no one would miss them immediately. It was cold, strategic, organized. They'd pull up, offer a lift, maybe lie and say they knew someone from town. Shaw was the talker. Evans was the watcher. And once the woman was in the car, they'd drive her far, far away, sometimes for hours. They would restrain her, assault her, and when they were done, they killed her, not in a panic, but methodically. Then they buried her, or dumped the body in a place so remote, so silent, it would take weeks to find, if ever. Gardy would later describe their approach as almost military. And the most terrifying part, no one knew they even existed yet, because they were careful. They didn't leave witnesses, until one day they did. It was early September, just weeks after the bodies of Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett had been found, and John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans were already stalking their next victim. This time, they were in Galway, cruising the roads like they had before. They spotted a woman walking alone. She fit their type: vulnerable, isolated, alone. They offered her a ride. She accepted. But something was different this time. She fought. They beat her and tied her up in the back of the car, bruised, gagged, restrained. For hours, they drove aimlessly, looking for a place to finish what they'd started. But the woman, her name has been withheld for safety, pretended to lose consciousness. She kept her breathing shallow. She didn't scream. She waited, and it worked. Eventually, thinking she was unconscious, they stopped at a petrol station. One of them got out to buy fuel. That's when she made her move. She bolted, barefoot, bruised, still partially bound. She ran inside the station and screamed for help. Gardaí were called immediately. They found Shaw and Evans less than an hour later in Waterford, still driving, still calm, as if it was just another day. Inside the car were ropes, gloves, duct tape, chloroform, a shovel, and traces of the victim's blood. There was no more doubt. These weren't one-off killers. They were predators, and they had a system. And now the nightmare was finally coming into the light. The year was 1978, and all of Ireland was watching. In a packed courtroom in Dublin, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans stood side by side, stone-faced, unemotional, and completely unapologetic. The evidence was overwhelming. Gardaí presented a horrifying list of items found in their car and homes: ropes, chloroform, weapons, clothing from victims, handwritten notes about their plans to take one a week, and statements, actual confessions from both men, detailing their crimes in graphic, remorseless detail. The courtroom fell silent when prosecutors read out the plan in Shaw's own words. "We were going to kill one woman each week until we were caught." That wasn't fiction. That was the mission. The murders of Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett were just the beginning. Had they not been stopped, there would have been more, many more. Witnesses described the men as cold, calculating, and predatory. One forensic psychologist testified, "They are compulsive sexual killers. If released, they will repeat." The judge didn't hesitate. Both Shaw and Evans were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole at the time. It was one of the harshest verdicts handed down in Ireland's modern criminal history. And yet, decades later, that last part would quietly change. Because Ireland's laws evolved and life imprisonment didn't always mean forever. After the trial, the public breathed a little easier. John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans were locked away. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But in the years that followed, criminal profilers and forensic psychologists kept returning to the case, not because it was over, but because it revealed something Ireland had never seen before: a methodical, repeatable system of murder. This wasn't rage. It wasn't impulse. This was premeditated, ritualized killing. Shaw and Evans didn't know their victims. That's what made it so terrifying. They weren't seeking revenge. They weren't driven by jealousy or personal pain. They were hunting women for sport, and their tools reflected that. They carried chloroform to subdue. They packed shovels and tarps in advance. They tracked quiet roads and hitchhiking routes across counties. Their behavior fit a profile that, in 1976, Ireland didn't even have language for. There were no databases, no word for serial killer in Irish legal circles. But that's what they were. Possibly Ireland's first true serial killers. Investigators later linked them to at least 5 more assaults and 2 additional murders that were never conclusively proven, but eerily similar. It wasn't just the bodies that left scars. It was the realization that monsters like this existed and could walk right past you. If John Shaw is released in early 2026, what happens next? According to current Irish law, he would not be freed without conditions. He would likely be placed in a halfway facility or supervised housing with restricted movement and mandatory reporting. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no such thing as a guaranteed safeguard. Shaw is now in his late 70s. Some might say he's too old to pose a danger, but psychologists argue that age doesn't erase psychopathy. It only changes the way it hides. And remember, Shaw never expressed remorse. Not once. He never accepted full responsibility for the murders, never helped identify other victims, never gave closure to grieving families. Experts warn that a man with his history and mindset is still capable of harm, even under supervision. There's also the public safety factor. Where would he go? Would the community be told? Would neighbors be notified? Would people even recognize his face? Because there are no public sex offender registries in Ireland like in other countries, and unless journalists or watchdogs expose his location, he could disappear quietly. And that's the chilling part. The same system that once failed to catch him for months might now be the one that lets him walk back into society unnoticed. For most people in Ireland, the names John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans have faded from memory. Decades have passed. The country has changed. But in small towns like Castlebar, Letterkenny, and Britta's Bay, the wounds are still there. The murder of Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett wasn't just violent, it was calculated. It shattered a sense of safety in a country that, until then, believed this kind of evil only happened elsewhere. Back in 1976, Ireland had no serial killer task forces, no DNA databases, no digital fingerprints or national alerts. But this horror forced the country to change. And now, nearly 50 years later, as the justice system prepares to review Shaw's parole, many are asking, has enough time passed to forget, or are we making the same mistake again? Because this isn't just about a killer. It's about the cost of memory, the cost of forgetting, and whether a man who once promised to kill 1 woman a week should ever have the chance to walk free while the women he murdered never came home.